The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Paranormal 5 is bringing you Para Peeps New England to help showcase some of the best in the paranormal and unexplained in the area. Their goal? To show the strength of paranormal unity by giving everyone in the field a voice. Join them as they discuss everything from haunted locations, aliens, metaphysical, cryptids, and much, much more. So sit back, enjoy the show, and as always, thank you for listening.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of New England Para Peeps. My name is Rich.
And I'm Missy.
And we are of Paranormal 5, a Maine-based paranormal family. First of all, just want to apologize for not getting to you guys at our last episode. We had a little bit of technical difficulties at a podcast that we were going to record. We had an amazing talk with...
Don't tell anybody.
Oh, yeah, we'll keep it a secret, but something didn't align correctly because it captured all of our terrible voices and didn't get any of our interviewees. So unfortunately, we're going to redo that one. But we are here tonight with two new guests. We are super excited to announce. Tonight we have Mike Stevens and Nomar Slevik. We are going to talk with them tonight about everything in the ufology world. We're going to talk about a book that they've worked on together, Granite Skies. And we're just going to dive into the world of extraterrestrial a little bit. So without further ado, I would like to bring on these guys. Mike, Nomar, how are you guys doing tonight?
Good. How you guys doing?
We are doing well.
Wonderful.
Mike, you there with us too?
Yeah, I'm here too. Thanks for having us.
Perfect. Awesome. No, we appreciate it, man. And thank you for kind of putting up with us as we've tried to get this thing up and running. Technology is not on our side, but we've got it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So
Sounds good.
So one of the things we like to do, very first questions is to kind of give both you guys an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourselves, what kind of got you in the direction of where you guys are now, what piqued your interest, what started this whole thing, diving into the ufology world and going down the path you guys are on. So maybe if Nomar, if you want to start first, and then Mike take it from there.
Sure. My whole thing with ufology started at a really young age, very similar to Mike. I was around 4 years old. I had a UFO sighting up in Fort Kent, Maine. And it was an astonishing experience. Like, I wasn't scared. I was just confused, and I tried to bring it to my dad's attention. And I was the only one that saw it. A couple weeks later, I ended up seeing the Northern Lights as well. So I knew at a young age that weird stuff happened in the sky, and I should probably pay attention. And as the years went on, I got into my teenage years, and I was collecting stories about UFO experiences in the state of Maine. And I was also checking out as many books as I could. The library in my school didn't have very many, but I was trying to check out all the UFO books that they had. And they were a real slog to get through. The ones that my school had anyways kind of read like textbooks, and that's not fun for a kid kind of just getting into the field. But I was boiling everything down to just what the experience was, by the witness. And I found it all fascinating. During this time, I was still seeing UFOs. Lights in the sky, sometimes an object. And as I got into my 20s, I was starting to reach out to people where I may have read a name in a newspaper, something like that, and reaching out to people about their UFO experiences. And I was literally sitting in my room one day, and I was looking at my bookshelf with all these books that I have on the paranormal, hauntings, UFOs, Bigfoot, all that good stuff. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, there's no book solely dedicated to UFOs in Maine. And I got the dumb idea that, hey, I'm going to write that book.
Sure.
So it took me a long time. It took probably 6-7 years to write that first book. It's my shortest and worst book, in my opinion. But it was a learning process through it all, and since then it's just kind of snowballed since. And I've written a total of 7 books on various subjects of the paranormal, but there has been a hyper focus on extraterrestrials. And in brief, that's kind of my story of where it all started.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. It's your turn.
So I guess simply put, I've been interested in them almost as long as they've been interested in me. A lot of us kind of fall into this category of, do we believe or do we not believe? I've had experiences since a very young age, around 3 as far as a standing memory, and they've continued to this day. So getting into this subject wasn't so much a choice as far as what I was going to do with it. That was probably the only choice I had in the matter. And I guess, that's the short version.
And I wonder too, because you guys both talk about having experiences as young kids, and I wonder what it is about that thought process as a young kid, because I recall myself not having any knowledge of ufology or anything of that nature, but as a kid, everything in the sky that moved was a UFO, and it's like that was like the first like obsession with unknown was UFO. And I wonder if that's a common thing where a lot of people's first, before they have their paranormal experiences or before they have maybe some of these others, it's the looking up, seeing things moving and being like, what was that?
Sorry, I'm getting some feedback there, but that's an interesting thought process, because it's really easy when you're that young. Your parents aren't just letting you run off into the woods or to, you yourself don't want to be in a creepy environment where it might be where you might have a haunting experience. But you go outside all the time as a kid, and everything you do is looking up because you're so small. And I don't think it's so far-fetched to think that a lot of kids are seeing things. Now, in Mike's experience, when he was right around 3 years old, he wasn't just outside playing or whatever. He and his cousin were drawn outside inexplicably. And the adults that were around, and there were many of them because there was some sort of party going on, didn't even notice that they were gone. And that's very weird, especially in the time where we grew up. And, it's all eyes on the little ones and make sure, that, they're doing what they're supposed to do or whatever. And all of a sudden, Mike and his cousin find themselves outside. And then while they're outside, this amazing thing happens. It may sound frightening to someone who's has some passive interest, but when you're at that age, it's just interesting. It's just it's fascinating. You're just like, what the hell is that? What the hell just happened?
Sure. And Mike, do you feel? I mean, obviously, I know this it goes back a little ways, but at the time, if you do you recall feeling like you were having an experience that you couldn't explain, or what?
Yeah, it's hard to exactly formate it into words, but I there was a little fear at the time, but like Nomar said, the onset of the event, I think, was just pure wonder, because everything at that age is new, and you don't, you kind of wait to see whether this is, something really cool or something really simple, like somebody's just playing a gag. And I think it started with that wonderment, but it slowly became almost like a primordial instinct of, oh, something's not right. This isn't. Sure. I don't want to be bad or good. This isn't what should be happening right now.
Oh, awesome.
So, how did you guys meet? And how did this story, this book that Nomar wrote, how did this all kind of come together?
Well, Mike and I, were really acquaintances to begin with. I was doing some presentations down at the KRI Center for Consciousness Studies in New Hampshire. That location is now defunct, but
Which is
before
such a
they
bummer.
closed their doors. Yeah, it's such a great place. But Mike and I, he had brought me and Bill Brock down because we were doing some work on a documentary called Abducted New England, and we wanted to do like a town hall type meeting to get a lot of people in one place to share their extraterrestrial experiences. And after that, I had gone down for a couple of presentations, and Mike was always my point man. And he's such a kind person and is very responsive when conducting business like this, booking times and all that stuff, and making sure he has everything you need. So we began chatting because of that. And before Mike and I even started talking about Mike's encounters, people that are in his world would come up to me and almost like in hushed tones, like, "Hey, have you heard what Mike's been going through?" And I'm like, "No," and so I'd get a little tidbit here and there. People didn't want to put all of his business out there, which I appreciated, but but there was enough for me to be like, I gotta talk to this guy and see, what he's experienced. So one of the last times I was at KRI, Mike was holding a tablet, and he had a picture, and the picture was at this cabin in New Hampshire. And in the picture, you could see part of the cabin, then you can see trees. But in the middle of the picture, and this was a trail camera picture, in the middle of the picture, you could see a beam of light coming down from the sky from nothing. It's a fascinating picture. And it's actually in the Granite Skies book. But after seeing that picture, like, I was a bit jaw dropped, and I was like, we got to talk some more, man. And I don't really remember, every day in between then and when we had our initial phone call. But I was sitting in a Burger King parking lot. I'm not sure why, but I was in a Burger King parking lot, and Mike and I got on the phone. I think we might have, something. we might have been on Facebook Messenger, and Mike was like, like, screw this, let's talk on the phone. It'll be easier instead of typing everything out. So we ended up having this like 2.5 hour conversation, and he basically ran through the majority of his major experiences that he's had over the years. Yeah. And I was like, this story needs to be told. It needs to be a book. And we kind of went back and forth with that. He had some concerns. I had some concerns. And I was also in the middle of like 3 projects. And I'm always in the middle of like 3 projects. So I was like, even if we do decide to do this, it still might take a year for me to get to it, But we stayed in fairly constant communication after that. And from there, our friendship was building. And I was getting more and more of his story. He was becoming more comfortable with me. I was becoming more comfortable with him, meaning I could, instead of just being in author or researcher mode, I could be like, we were more friendly, and I could ask him more intimate questions. Mm-hmm. Maybe something I might not ask another experiencer, right off the bat. Yeah. But since Mike and I were getting close, I felt more comfortable in asking him some questions. Mm-hmm. So fast forward maybe a year or so. I'm so sorry, I'm hogging the mic, Mike. But fast forward a year or so, and we can see each other on camera, and Mike is being rude, frankly. But anyway, so fast forward a year, and Mike and I finally meet for like a long form in-person interview. We met at a hotel in Kennebunk or Kennebunkport, something like that. And so he came up from New Hampshire. I'm in the Bar Harbor area of Maine, so I came down and had some mics out so I could record everything. And he told me his whole story. So that was fine and great. I went home. There was a lot of transcribing that happened on my end, taking notes and all this stuff, listening to the recordings. And while listening to the recordings, I had more questions, during the recording. So I'd send him a Facebook message, blah, blah, blah. Well, we ended up getting together again. I don't know if it was 6 months after that, something like that. We got together again. This time we were in Mike's office in Newmarket, New Hampshire, I believe. And we had another long form conversation. So now at this point, Mike and I are I would say we're friends. We were probably acquaintances for a while. And I felt at this point we were finally friends. We were very comfortable around each other. And it was a much more intense conversation. It was like another 4 hours. We had to take some breaks through it, not just for the long factor, but an emotional factor. We kind of just had to walk away sometimes. So during these conversations, I'm taking a bunch of notes, but I have my recorder there. And while Mike is telling me some of these stories, I'm just getting lost in his stories. And it's almost like a movie was developing in my mind, and I'm watching
the book was writing
Mike
itself.
is going through. Yeah. And that conversation is where I think that book morphed without us knowing it, but that book at that point morphed into something we were not expecting, nor were we ready for. It became not just a book about UFO encounters. It became a book about humanity and struggling with mental health and what you do when you experience something traumatic. And it's not always pretty. Most of the time it's not pretty. So Mike was just being so genuinely raw and honest. And I would ask a question that I probably shouldn't have asked, and he was just forthright and honest, and he kept sharing. And it was a trip. It was really a trip. But I think that last long form conversation was the catalyst of that book turning into something that we weren't expecting. Mike, I don't know if you want to jump in now, but.
Yeah, I can definitely, I'd agree that it wasn't the most obvious turn, but if we look back, it was, definitely where things started to turn. And that wasn't just a long meeting between us rehashing the same things. We actually we drove all around the state, going to places where these things actually happened to me. We listened to the regression together, and it was an emotional long day for both of us. And we came out of it more not as how a lot of experiencers and authors would go, like, at that point I had no worries that he's going to write something to make light of my situation. And I, at that point, not speaking for him, he's like, I don't think this guy is lying to me. Whether it's true or not, he believes, whatever he's telling me is true. And it kind of set our boots in place. We didn't realize the whole world was going to turn tipsy-turvy after that. And there were a bunch of things we had to overcome that maybe we wouldn't have if we hadn't, connected that way. And kind of got off of that author client type situation.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, it almost just makes you wonder too, especially given the topics and the circumstances, if there was a bigger plan in place as far as you guys meeting, and the fact that you share these same, thought processes and experiences. And then how it just kind of two worlds that got brought together. Was it a coincidence? Was there something more at stake here? Like that just you can dive into a lot of that too, I feel.
Absolutely. Like everything that happened to this book seemed to have, I wouldn't necessarily say negative, but a one way that we really didn't want it to go, and then the way that it happened. And it just seemed like everything was happening the way it was supposed to. And some of it was yucky and some of it was really awesome. And we ended up walking away from my publisher. I was under contract at the time. I'd actually still be under contract, I think, right, Mike? As of right now,
we'd put it out till this summer if we stayed.
Right. So if we had stayed with my publisher, it wouldn't have come out it still wouldn't be out. and we didn't have 100% total control, and it was very important for Mike and I to have control of the words.
Of course.
And that's not to say that the publisher would have changed things dramatically, but we knew that the stuff I was writing, like, we wanted it out verbatim. We didn't want them changing anything.
Well,
And there was
to
also
you guys,
some,
it's more than just the words on the paper there. I mean, there was that emotional connection that you guys
yeah,
had that the publisher may not have captured as he's doing what he felt was best to put this together, where if you guys can incorporate that emotion behind the words, you know.
right. That's a really good way to put it, because some of that may have been lost in translation. And this is the type of publisher where, like, they assign you an editor, so it's not like I know this person or I may have worked with them before. It's just whose ever turn it is, gets my manuscript. And I didn't like how that felt, And they wanted to control even the title of the book. They wanted to control what the cover looked like. And while that's not the biggest of deals, it was a big deal for Mike and I at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we just couldn't come to an agreement about that with the publisher. So I had to, because they agreed to put out the book, and then I actually had to turn them down. They send what's called an offer memo, and I had to, like, officially turn it down. I had to sign a thing that said no, basically. Yeah. And so, still being under contract for 2 years, I was like, Mike, I'm scared. Like, we might not be able to put this out for a couple of years because I'm still under contract, and the contract means I have a non-compete clause, which means I can't put something else out that could compete with the previous book I put out. So the publisher ended up being the loveliest of people, and they let me out of my contract early, and they said, go do what you have to do. And Mike and I are forever thankful, for that opportunity. So we were able to turn right around, and I started the process of trying to self-publish that book. And it's a hell of a lot of work, but completely worth it, at the very least in this instance,
And that's actually funny you bring it up that way, because that kind of leads us into our next question of, so you guys got together, you guys got this information, you put this book together, but what did this book turn into for you guys, and what is it that you've been able to walk away with since putting out this book?
Mike, I say you take the lead on that one, man.
All right. For me, it was, in one of my biggest reservations before we did it was, I'm pretty open, like, in our fields, paranormal, UFO. I don't mind coming out and doing interviews like this or going up on stage and talking about it. But in my private life, there's a lot of people close to me who maybe have a hint of some of it, but don't really know. So when this book came out, it was all telling, not only on the UFO front in my life, but a lot of my personal emotions and well-being throughout those experiences. And I had to really think hard, like, did I want to share that? Because I've hidden that from everybody forever. But then what I do with Granite Skies is like to do, the opposite with everybody else.
Sure.
Which
you're the support for those people.
And it's, it's so easy to fix somebody else's problems, not your own.
Yeah.
So, like, when this book came out, I knew, my mother had to read it, my father had to read it, my daughter had to read it. So there are a lot of people like that in my life. I wasn't sure. And then, I finally just got to the point where it's like, you can be scared about it, or you can help other people with it. And that, that was like, all right, yeah, let's do it. That's, and once that kind of mindset came in, and me and, Nomar were kind of entrenched as war buddies in this project by that point, we went deeper into the emotional stuff, the stuff I was never going to tell anybody. I sure wasn't going to tell an author, to put in a book about me. But, he wasn't an author at that point anymore. He was a friend. And I said, hey, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And we went full force.
Yeah, yeah. And I had some similar things. So one thing about this book is, you've got all of Mike's extraterrestrial encounters in the book. Then there's another layer that's Mike's humanity and mental health and trauma. And because he was so raw and so genuine with me, I was compelled. It just came out in the writing where I started sharing some of my mental health concerns and what I go through trauma wise, and that was like this minor but third layer to the book. And I even had concerns about my own family reading about me having suicidal ideation and suffering from anxiety and depression, and having seen therapists and things like that. And when my dad read the book, he you know he had a conversation with me, and it was a very positive one, but he's like, why didn't you share this? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't share it. I was scared, or I didn't want you to see me as some weirdo or something like that. But now, like, I don't care about that. It was so freeing to talk to my dad about that, and to talk to Mike about all this stuff, that we've just become these huge proponents for normalizing the discussion around mental health. It's almost everybody suffers from it. And if you don't suffer from it, I don't know if you're being honest with yourself. And I just think and I just think it's important to discuss, because the bottom line, regardless of book sales or any of that ancillary stuff that really doesn't matter, if we can help somebody, and when I say help somebody, like maybe saving a life, because Mike and I get into some dark stuff in the book, and it discusses suicide and the dark thoughts that surround that. And so if somebody can see that Mike has overcome some of that, and the book ends on a note of hope. It doesn't end on a sad or dark note. It ends on a note of hope. And after somebody reads that, we hope that we can, spare somebody's life, hopefully, just by reading what he's gone through and overcome, And as it turns out, we started getting feedback like that. Mike and I, we're anxiety-ridden weirdos, and so we keep waiting. We keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, something good happens, something bad happens. That's just how our mind works, And that hasn't happened with this book, in the sense of people's reactions to it. We're still waiting. Like, I'm still pretty sure someone's going to have a really bad negative review, and it's going to kill us. But all the feedback that we've gotten has been very positive, but not just positive, but and not just Mike. Thank you for being so brave and sharing your story, which is very nice. But we've been getting feedback from people that, like, hey, this is actually helping me. It's mind blowing. I don't know, Mike. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
yeah,
it's crazy.
I don't know. Yes, we both, I think, are still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't know if we'd be worried about it. We've been waiting for so long. It might be just like a relief at this point.
Yeah, that's true.
But the feedback, you always expect them to be like, something that says, the book sucked, we don't believe them, this or that. Like, that kind of came with the territory, and you expected it. And we haven't got any of that yet. But the feedback we're getting wasn't just like, oh, this is a great book, this and that. It was like, no, you helped me. You changed me. You said what I wasn't strong enough to say. And
sure. Well, and I would compare it almost to, like a musician putting out a very emotional piece of music that somebody else took and was able to adopt it themselves and help them through a certain time in their life, and especially dealing with what this book deals with. Again, obviously a bigger picture, but also even on the extraterrestrial level, of having that specific support group for people that, have gone through an experience like that and don't know where to go afterwards, or don't know how to deal with the way that it's affecting them. So I think it just gives more validation to the book that what you guys put out was such an emotional connection and true and real, that it allows people to take it as their own and work it through themselves. And that's awesome. That's good.
I also think it's like one thing that we kind of forget about with experiences, whether it be paranormal, ufology, like UFO, ET, or even cryptid. Like, there's trauma behind a lot of these experiences that people have. And I think it kind of gets downplayed, just like, oh, it was probably just a scary situation, or
Right.
you have people that just don't believe you. So there's just, I don't know.
Well, you look at it on other levels. I mean, nobody would ever downplay the idea of PTSD. I mean, we know it's a real thing. We know
Right.
that people deal with it, and we would never question it. So that same thought process should go into some of these experiences.
There's people that are abductees that have
Right,
PTSD.
right.
Like, it needs to be.
Right. Well, there's one thing that Mike and I talk about sometimes is where I have my own struggles with mental health. He has his struggles with mental health. The catalyst for him has seemingly been extraterrestrial. The catalyst for me is not that. And regardless of our catalysts for these mental health concerns, we still have those issues. So just on that level, people can relate. They didn't have to have an extraterrestrial encounter. And for the person that has had the extraterrestrial encounter, then my God, I'm hopefully it's monumentally relatable. I for a previous book, I interviewed this woman. And we had this big, long conversation, and she was telling me, her encounters and all that good stuff. And by the end of it, she was looking at me and she had tears in her eyes, like tears had welled up in her eyes. And she asked me, like, why me? And I just had to be honest and said, I have absolutely no idea. But what I can tell you is that by you sharing this story, it might help somebody else not feel so alone. And to me, that's a really big deal. And that seemed to satisfy her, and that's just one story in a previous book. This is an entire book of that. Mike's story is an entire book of that. And it blows my mind,
Well, I think you hit on a good point there. I mean, like, so for instance, in the interview with that woman, she asked a question, but the answer that she got wasn't the answer she was looking for, but it was the answer that she made most sense. So, like, you might not know why you had that experience, but what you do know is that because you've had that experience, you can now help other people that have experience to realize that it wasn't just me. So it's
right.
that realization you're able to bring to her, that's strong, and that's
Yeah. And I've even talked to her since then, and she's much more open about talking about her experiences. She's like, "Oh, I talked to my daughter finally about it," and blah 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 blah, and that's really great to hear. And that was just me with a woman one-on-one. Now we have strangers reading Mike's story, and who knows how many other people it's helping exponentially. That's exciting to think about. It's such a good thing.
That is. So I know that you mentioned a little bit ago, I think Mike, you mentioned that you had a hypnotherapy done. Now, like I've heard like this is kind of like a controversial thing with some people. But I'd like to hear both of your guys' input and thought about hypnotherapy when it comes to abductees.
I don't think you even need to classify it by abductees. It is.
I guess, yeah, that's true with anybody, I guess.
Yeah, it can be useful. I think recording it is the key to it. If the professional giving the regression is asking leading questions, then, your results are ruined whether you're telling the truth or not, So I think whether it's good or bad is on that level, is really up to the hypnosis on their professionalism and the way they approach it. As an experiencer, is it good or bad? Sometimes, like, it can, give you a little more clarity into a situation. Probably won't give you all the answers you want. But the problem with it is once you open up those memories in that part of your brain, other stuff that you might have not remembered or maybe aren't quite in the best position to deal with at the moment suddenly start crashing through too. So it's a slippery slope on both ends. I don't personally have anything against it. I do think it does some good, but maybe not across the board. But that's my thoughts on it. I'll let Nomar speak for himself.
Yeah, I think I echo some of Mike's sentiments. I can't speak to it from an experiencer standpoint, nor have I gone through it myself. But from an author's standpoint, in regards to specifically extraterrestrial encounters, I know that the brain and memory is extremely malleable and fallible and can be influenced easily when under that type of regression. So I think it's key that you just have a very professional hypnotist, so they're not asking the leading questions. And if I'm listening to a recording and I'm hearing the leading questions, it's really hard for me to trust what the experiencer is saying. Even in some of Mike's regression, there were some leading questions, but it was interesting because you can hear Mike and he's almost fighting it, while under hypnosis, and he's nope, that's not right. This is what I'm seeing, type of thing. And I thought that led credibility to me, to Mike's hypnosis, where he wasn't falling for the leading questions. Now, the hypnosis that was working with Mike, that's somebody we both know, and to me, it doesn't feel like his intent was to influence Mike's experiences. I think this might have been the first time he was working with somebody with extraterrestrial experiences. Don't quote me on that, but so I don't think he was intending any of these leading type of questions, and there wasn't a ton of them. But anyways, that's my opinion on it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to ask both you guys, and I'll set it up by saying that Missy and I actually were just able to go and do a small private investigation, a paranormal investigation. And so after meeting with this woman and speaking with her and having her telling us of all of her experiences and what she is claiming to be seeing and dealing with in her home, she is identifying this as an extraterrestrial experience. And so it kind of leads us to question, and I know, Mike, we had talked about this before at one of our meetups. Where do you guys see the crossovers between extraterrestrial experiences and then potential paranormal? Because we personally feel that there can be a lot of them. I think there can be a lot of misidentifications of both, where somebody may have been experiencing something extraterrestrial and then, classified it as a paranormal experience, or vice versa. Where do you guys see the crossover, or what are your guys' specific guidelines for when people are telling you their stories to identify them as either being something that's extraterrestrial or it's something that might be otherwise?
Well, I know for me personally, I like that you use that word guidelines. I go into it with no guidelines because I want as broad a picture as possible. I don't want to look through a specific lens, through an extraterrestrial lens or haunting lens or whatever. I want as broad a picture as possible, and then I start to whittle it down with my own questions and the information that they start to reveal to me. And so I guess that's just how I go about it. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same process, and I think it all starts, with the person or family who's having the occurrences, their predefined belief structure. Because if you don't believe in UFOs but you believe in ghosts, you're going to believe it's a haunting. If you don't believe in ghosts but you've seen a UFO, you might think it's UFO related.
Right.
But a lot of it starts out the same. Seeing shadows or figures moving through your room. You put your keys here every day and then they're not there one day. Like little things like that. Very common with experiencers and very common in, paranormal investigations. So I think the categories are labels we put on it too early, as opposed to just saying, all right, this is what happened. Let's see where the road goes.
Gotcha.
There's a story from the late 1800s that happened in Maine, And it's been written about really since it happened. But there was a reverend who first wrote about this encounter, or these encounters that this town was actually having. And there's a story about this woman named Nellie Butler, and that she's haunting the town. And intermixed with this Nellie Butler haunting story are other stories of people seeing white rocks floating in the sky. There was a person who was speaking to a smaller type of entity. And while they were speaking to them, they go, "Aren't you Nellie Butler?" And as soon as that person kind of put that thought out into the atmosphere, the entity in front of them grew into an adult female entity, as if to give that person the correct context to look at it. So in researching and studying this Nellie Butler case from late 1800s, I can't remember the date specifically, a lot of it read to me as potentially paranormal mixed with extraterrestrial. And I ended up including that story in one of my UFO books because of the similarities, and left it up to the reader to decide if it was like a haunting type of story or an extraterrestrial story. But really interesting how they can coexist. Like Mike was saying, if you have a predetermined notion of what an encounter is, then that's what it's going to be, until you can get an investigator looking at it from a different perspective, or no perspective, which is preferred in my opinion.
Wow.
Oh, no, that's really interesting. And actually, Mike, with this case, we were actually going to chit chat with you, and we actually would like you to kind of come in and speak with this,
Yeah.
speak with
And
the
it's
client.
funny you just mentioned that story, Nomar, because that was one of this woman we talked to. Like, one of the things that has her leaning towards being extraterrestrial is the fact that it does go through this shape shifting pattern where it's
Oh,
presented
wow.
itself as a mass, a black mass, and then it's actually formed into a humanoid figure, almost to kind of give her clarity as to what she's dealing with.
Right.
But then even when it does that, she talks about how the mouth becomes very distorted and she can't necessarily see lips, and the mouth doesn't move like a mouth should move.
Mhm.
It's also presented itself in an animal form. So it was
Oh, wow.
it had a lot of different just shapes and thoughts that it was taking on. And that's what's kind of led her down that
That's it.
road of being, and also her
Yeah.
communications. She's asked about whether, she's come out right forth and asked, because she has very, very vivid communication with this, and asked, are you from this planet? Got the answer, no. Are you from here? Like, you live in this world? No, I don't. And so it just,
Wow.
all of that has her leaning towards that as being the cause. So
Yeah, that's really interesting, because there's a few different things at play, and again, it comes down to the lens that whoever chooses to look through. But some of that sounds like a shadow person, maybe manifesting into a more solid being. Also, there's been tales of people who talk to demons, and demons are supposedly have never walked the earth. So if you ask them if they're from here or earth, they might say no. But, does that mean extraterrestrial, or does that mean demon? Or, like, there's a
right,
lot of things at
It's a
play
rabbit
there.
hole.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And then could that mean that all of this weird stuff that happens along with cryptids, like, is it all connected in some weird way? Like, it's all the same thing. Everyone's just looking at it from their different perceptions and perspectives. It's
sure,
interesting.
different lens. Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of experiencers tend to have paranormal type activities in their life following encounters after that. But in a couple cases, there's been where they thought they saw what was a ghost, a deceased relative who had just passed, almost lure them out into, like a field or something where an abduction occurred after. So it kind of plays on both sides of the line right there.
Yeah, that's
And we're
interesting.
kind of tiptoeing around Bigfoot or cryptozoology part, and I'm sure there's cases that match up just along. Just that's
Sure.
not either of our strong suits.
Yeah, I don't want to like misquote a cryptid story that I know, a little bit about, and but not the whole thing. So that's why I'm tiptoeing around it.
well, but no, but there's also been a lot of experience about that where
Or
there's
there's
been
this
Bigfoot sightings where people have gotten a notion to look in a certain direction prior to seeing what they felt was, a Bigfoot sighting. So, they kind
Yeah,
of played into
yeah,
that same thing where they were lured to look in a certain direction, or,
sure.
telepathically
yeah,
communicated by, or they claim that they were spoken to by Sasquatch telepathically,
yeah.
so who knows?
Yeah, and there's
It's
some Yeah, and there's some Dogman stories about
Mhm.
them appearing as orbs, that move throughout the woods and then come into existence, or however
Yeah, and
that
it's the same
works.
thing
And
with Sasquatch. You see the orbs. It's just very strange that you see a lot of crossovers, like across the
yeah,
entire board and stuff
Yep.
like that. So it is very interesting. So, Mike, I would love, and this is like kind of like a fact that I honestly like, I feel really bad that I didn't know this, but I would love to know your role about getting the Betty and Barney Hill um plaque monument up in the Franconia Notch area. Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
Franconia Notch area.
yeah. So it's in Lincoln, right outside the Indian Head Resort.
Hmm.
Um, so I wrote the original petition to the state, which is the process all markers have to go through.
Hmm.
Wrote the original draft for the marker, and it's very complicated. They have to cross every T, match every I, this sort of thing to make sure it's not just a local tale, that it is historically something.
Yep.
Uh, and then Kathleen Martin got on board with it. She is Betty and Barney Hill's niece, and she really was able to have the facts and this and that documentation of everything the marker claimed to back it up. And at the end of the day, the Historical Society for the state of New Hampshire said, we can't really come out and say aliens, UFOs are real, but we can say this is historically important because of the cultural impact it had.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
But
Awesome.
I think that's so cool, and I didn't know that, Mike, and I think like I was just like so geeked out, and I was just like, oh my God, like Mike did
yeah,
that.
I was I was the same way when he told me.
No,
I
because
was
that's like
very shocked and surprised.
that's huge. Like that is like one of like the biggest cases that you hear about. Like, it just with abductees, like I got geeked
That's
out.
awesome.
I'm so proud of you, Mike.
Fangirling.
I know I was told him like I know him. We're friends.
You would take somebody out there and be like, you know how this got here?
I know
I
the
know the
guy who
guy.
kind of did that.
And so Nomar, a question for you. Aside from Mike, of course, which has been a huge inspiration to the project you guys have put down, what is another one of your most interesting New England cases of extraterrestrial that you've come across?
Wow. So there are a lot of really interesting New England cases, but there have been some that I've been involved with because of my own investigations into them, as opposed to getting some newspaper clippings and maybe reaching out to somebody and developing a story to write in regards to that. There are some, if I have access and means to travel and all that good stuff, where I'll go out and speak to the person face to face, and then also conduct some sort of investigation while on site. And those are my favorite ones. And there's been a couple of UFO ones, but there was a cryptid one that I did that does have some UFO involvement. There was a gentleman in the town of Camden, Maine, who claimed to have seen some sort of Mothman-like creature. And all I could find, while I was working on this previous, a couple of years ago, one of the books, I was like, boy, I wonder if there's any Mothman type sightings that have happened in Maine. So I just did a simple, stupid Google search. It was literally Mothman and Maine. And I was combing through all of these links. And then I finally found this headline that read something like Mothman creature spotted in Camden, Maine, something like that. And I was like, whoa, Camden. First of all, I'm not very far from Camden.
Right.
Second, it's a beautiful area, so that would be awesome to go to. And third, what? Somebody thinks they saw Mothman in Maine? Like that's crazy. And fairly recently, it was in 2001, I believe, 2001, 2006. I don't have the book in front of me. I apologize. But so anyways, I was having a hard time getting the full story though. So I reached out to a colleague of mine who's also in who they are an author, and they are also into the paranormal and Bigfoot and UFOs and all that stuff. So I reached out to them, and I sent them the headline. I was like, "Can you help me find more information on this person or the story?" A couple days later, they emailed me back and said, "I got a name." I was like, "What? You have a name?" So they gave me the name. I plugged it into Facebook. And of course, 1,000 names came up that matched it. But, I was filtering through and just looking through the Maine ones because it was a Maine resident. They seemingly still lived in Maine. So then I was just contacting the Maine people. And there weren't as many of those, maybe 25 or so. Well, after 7, 8, 10 messages to these people where I'm sure I sounded like a weirdo, I just kind of copy and pasted like, "Hey, are you the guy who potentially saw a Mothman creature in Camden, Maine?" And finally, I found the dude, and he was like, "Yeah, that's me." And I'm like, "What? Like, can we talk?" And I explained who I was and what I was doing, and they're like, "Yeah, I'd love to share the story. That sounds awesome." So we talk on the phone. He tells me this amazing story, which I'll tell you in a second. And due to confidential, wanting to keep their privacy, they did ask that I change their name in the book. So in the book, I call the gentleman Robert Osborne, and he was 17 at the time, and he was walking home. And he was walking home from downtown Camden, Maine. Camden is, if anybody out there has seen a Stephen King movie that takes place in a coastal town in Maine, that's the town of Camden. Camden, yeah. Basically, that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. Very beautiful coastal Mainers. There's an affluent area. There's just an area just for regular people. So downtown Camden, Maine, and where this kid lived were just like a mile apart, less than a mile apart. And he was walking home one early evening. It was like 6 p.m. And while he was walking home, he started hearing these really loud squeaks or chirp like sounds. And he thought it was like a large rat or a mouse or something like at his feet. So he looks down. And while he's looking down, he sees the shadow of something on the tar, as if it were something flying above him and casting a shadow on the road below him. And he's like, "What?" So he looks up and he sees this really weird looking creature flying. And he said the body was probably about 4 feet long. And it had a really weird head. It was just kind of like a square with tubes coming out of it. He said it was really weird. And it was making this chirping or squeaking sound. And as he's looking at it, it takes off and it actually swoops up and flies over the apartment building that he was living in with his parents at the time. And he said when this thing flew over the apartment, he could see that its wingspan went from one side of the house's eaves to the other side of the house's eaves. And he said that was 25 feet long. And that's insane. That's like the size of a Cessna or something, you know, that's crazy. And he said the body and the wings were fairly translucent and, kind of veiny, and which leads to me to believe that he was actually seeing something, like the types of details he was telling me,
sure.
So I decided to go down to that area, and he gave me the address of where he used to live. And I went to that apartment building and I measured from eave to eave. And sure enough, it was like 24, 26 feet, something like that. I was like, wow. And he said that, when it flew up over his apartment building, it kind of went down into the swamp that's behind the building. So I went over to the swamp behind his building, and sure enough, it's very swampy. The area is not developed. There's houses all around, but there's nothing in this, I don't know, like 1,000 square foot area. It's just kind of swampy. I'm sure it's just tough to build there because of the swamp. But there is some parking areas down there. So, I was getting my lay of the land during the daylight, but I wanted to go back there at night to see if I could see anything. So one thing I always do is I stop in at the cop shop, let them know what I'm doing. And they're always like, okay, weirdo, like, go have fun. I just want them to know that, there's somebody going to be there like in the middle of the night. And,
I
I
have
don't
to
want to
say,
get the
like,
cops
thank
calling me.
you. Like, that's awesome that you do that because, that's good
Yes,
policy
yes,
to
definitely.
check in and make sure
Yeah.
permission.
Yeah. Well, I learned the hard way one time, so never again.
Yeah,
Like, I should have been smart enough to do that. But anyway, so I'm parked down in this area, the swampy area. It's probably midnight. And I have my girlfriend's at the time. I have her son with me. I've been with this kid since he was like 5 years old. He's 16 now. He and I are like still bonded for life. We still hang out. He's such a great kid. But he was with me at that time, and he wanted to go along to see what this was all about. And so while we were sitting down in the swampy area, I was explaining to him the story of Mothman. I think I even played him the trailer to the Mothman prophecies, just to kind of get his head wrapped around it. And this kid is like 10 years old at the time, right? And while he can be, scared of the dark, if he's with somebody, he's totally fine. So he's sitting there eating Sour Patch Kids, just having a great time. But also like asking questions, like, when are we going to see something? Well, I don't know, buddy. This is just kind of a boring thing. You just kind of wait and see, and he's like, okay. So I'm sitting there, my head's on a swivel, his head's on a swivel. We're kind of waiting to see or hear anything. I don't remember how long this happened, but we had been sitting there for a while. And he says to me, hey, I think I see some red eyes over in the woods. I'm like, shut up. No, you don't. And he's like, yeah. I've seen him like 4 or 5 times now, but I just wanted to make sure I saw them before I brought it to your attention. I'm like, okay, well, where are you seeing it? So he pointed out this tree, and there's this really large branch that's coming out of this tree that's maybe, I don't know, 50, maybe 100 yards into the woods. But it's this really, larger tree amongst the other trees that are there. So it was fairly easy to see. And he said that the eyes were right around the level of the branch that was there. I didn't go up to the tree because it was out in the swampy area, but from where I was, it looked like that branch was maybe 12 feet high, something like that. And he's like, just watch, you'll see them at some point. So we're both staring at this branch on this tree. Again, it's the middle of the night. I have a 10-year-old with me, and we're looking for Mothman. Okay, so this is all very
Sounds like my type of adventure.
Yeah. It was very fun too. So we're looking, and then boom, 2 big red eyes appear. And they're there for a second, and then they kind of just like fade out. They blink out to fade out. It wasn't super quick, but they,
Sure.
faded quickly. And that was the only time I saw him, but he was super excited. He's like, well, look, there it is. And, but again, that was the only time it happened that night. He's like, so do you think that was the Mothman? Because I think he remembered from the Mothman Prophecies trailer, just seeing those big red eyes that are very prominent in that movie. And so I explained to him, I go, well, first of all, that's definitely weird. And you've got some good investigator chops. You were patient, and you saw something and you didn't immediately freak out. You waited to see if it would repeat. Like, that's all very instinctual. That's because I didn't teach him anything, he just did that. And it was really cool. But I also explained, you know what, buddy? Where we're looking right now, it looks like it's all woods because it's in the middle of the night. I don't know this area well enough. There could be a road on the other side of the swamp that I don't know about. And maybe we're seeing car lights, like car brake lights every once in a while. And it just, it's cresting a hill or something. And that's why it's hitting right where that branch is. That's maybe what we're seeing. Or maybe we're seeing Mothman. I don't know. I don't know. But he was okay with that explanation. He just thought the whole experience was cool. So that's one of my favorite Maine stories, because of a potential Mothman sighting from somebody else in Maine.
Definitely.
And then I had this bonding moment with this child that I just adore. And
awesome.
we potentially saw something. Now, on our ride back, so, it's probably like 3 a.m. now. Poor mother is in a hotel room by herself, passed out, and we come, walking in, probably waking her up. But anyways, on our ride back, we were just kind of a bit silent, and he was tired because it was pretty late. But all of a sudden, this deer ran across the road right in front of us while we were driving. And, we're probably doing 30 miles an hour or something. We were in no danger of hitting the deer, but this creature came out of nowhere in the middle of the night, and it freaked us both out.
Yeah.
He reached over and grabbed my chest, and he was just big eyes, like, "Oh my God, was that Mothman?" I was like, "No, it's just a deer, buddy."
That's awesome. But even still,
yeah.
like the idea of Mothman, it shows up prior to an event taking place, like a potential, like
Oh,
a
snap.
precursor, like a warning, and like all of a sudden, just coincidentally, you guys come across that deer.
Harbinger of doom.
Yeah.
Oh man,
that's awesome.
That's funny to think about. But yeah, so that was a great encounter, and he's 16 now, and we will still bring that up. Like, oh, remember when we went and looked for Mothman? He's like, oh, that was so fun.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
No, as like we do it with our kids,
right? Exactly.
Like
I think that's huge.
It's awesome.
I think that's huge.
It's awesome memories.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So guys, it's kind of about that time to wrap up. So we would kind of like this time it's for you guys to, promote yourself. Where can people find you?
Where can they get the book? Where can they get to you guys?
Your books, and to be able to get in contact with Mike for his services that he does through Granite Skies. So
go ahead, Mike. You take this first. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, I think you
Mike,
muted us,
muted.
Mike.
Oh.
Oh, he's yelling loud. But...
I double tap it a lot.
Oh, there he is.
I'm impatient, so I hit it again quick, and yeah. So the website is Granite Skies or granitesky.org. And then it's on Facebook. You can find me, Granite Sky Services. But there's links to contact me either way. Most of our public events are listed on the Facebook. If you're looking for something more private, one-on-one, go to the website and you can look at all that. And Nomar will give out his links, but there's also a link to Nomar's shop to get the book on there as well.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, Mike is Granite Sky Services, singular, and the book is Granite Skies. And a link that people can go to check out all my stuff is allmylinks.com/Slevik. You can find Granite Skies there and all my other stuff.
Awesome. Well, guys, awesome talking to you guys. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for your support at our event.
Yes,
a couple weeks ago. We appreciate you guys being there, and we really look forward to doing some more stuff with you guys. Mm-hmm. And as
there's
always,
some experiments coming up
we do,
with
absolutely.
You guys.
So,
you guys don't know about it. Yes. Well, you guys know about it, but
a little bit.
Other people don't know about it.
And as always, to everyone here who's listening, guys, thank you for hanging out with us. And go please check out both Mike and Nomar. Check out their sites. Check out their shops. Pick up their books. And I think I speak on behalf of everybody just to kind of keep looking up. And see what you guys can see up there. So, Mike, Nomar, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you so much.